I gotta talk about it. It's a gigantic story that's happened for the third time in a row now. And if the Georgia case progresses anymore, it'll be just the third time in 4 indictments, if that goes through. He's facing 4 criminal counts, federal counts, in relation to the January 6th probe. Now, what's, in my opinion, interesting about this case and changes it and makes it different than, say, the case he has with Stormy Daniels, which is semi-related to elections and semi-related to his race for president back in 2016, but it's more of a long shot, and it just has to do with the misappropriation of funds to a porn star, which, I mean, that's just like Donald Trump's, like, that's just like common Donald Trump, like, scummy behavior. That's not at the point of threatening our democracy or trying to undermine our democratic institutions. Like, it's bad, but it's not the worst thing he has done. And in the grand scheme of things, it's quite small. And if, like, worst case scenario with that, he's not seeing any time behind bars. Let's be for real. But I will say that he could still face legal repercussions for it. But that case, that's one case. And then the second case had to do with the mishandling of classified government documents. And that's bad. You could call that a threat to national security, which for once wouldn't be a buzzword to say that. You could say it's hypocritical due to his lambasting of Hillary Clinton and the emails and the fact that while in office, and this is not talked about enough. I remember when I was with Destiny and Rob Noor, and on the debate arena, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, and I brought this up. It hadn't been brought up yet, and I can't believe this isn't brought up. Every single conversation we have about this is when he violated this law, and he violated the law in bringing these classified documents to his home, improperly handling them, and just showing them to people with zero clearance to see these classified materials, showing them supposed American invasion plans. Now, the idea of an American invasion of Iran, which is what it's speculated to be, is a story in and of itself. But those types of classified documents should not be being shown to just random people. Definitely after raising the penalties while in office for violations of the Presidential Records Act. Okay, but again, that's not, I think, the central bad thing that Trump did while he was in office, which in my opinion is attack the foundational institutions of our country in trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. That, in my opinion, was the worst thing Trump did in office. Because if we lose the process of peaceful transition of power and we lose trust in those institutions, the elections no longer are about who won the election, and it's more about who can exert more political control and influence. And that's how you get to situations like we have right now in Niger. That's how we get to situations like we saw in Mali, Burkina Faso. That's how you see we get into situations like in Myanmar. Myanmar is a little bit more complicated because it has to do with power sharing with the military, but you get my basic premise. If you don't have a strong consensus around the peaceful transferal of power and you start bringing that into question, definitely when you look at the violence around January 6th as well, and what Trump was trying to do with the fake electors leading into J6, and what they tried to do to Mike Pence in making him try to reject the results of the election even though they knew they had lost, that to me is the worst thing Trump did in office. And so it's good that this particularly is being held up to him now and said, you have to answer for this. That is good. In fact, I think this is much more important than all of the other cases that are being brought against him. Let's read a little bit of the details, then we're going to talk about the case against Trump, because Trump right now, honestly, just looks pretty boned. It's not impossible for him to wiggle his way out of this. I wouldn't completely rule it out. Trump has a storied history of not only fighting legal battles very ferociously and within the public eye, but specifically delaying legal battles. So it could become a question of not whether or not Trump is found innocent or he wins the case, but if he can delay it long enough to get elected, and then once he's in office, well, how much power does the state have now to enforce him? Are they going to put the acting president in prison? Of course not. They're not going to do that. So it's not just a question on whether or not Trump can win the case. It's a question of how long they can delay the case. And you can already see Trump's lawyers and staff going on CNBC, going on other news stations, immediately arguing that the case needs to be delayed. That, you know, they say, well, what about a speedy trial? They say people have right to a speedy trial. Well, yeah, that's on the right of the defendant. That, you know, actually, it shouldn't be in 90 days. That's ridiculous, even though that's what the law stipulates, 90 days. That's how it's supposed to be done. So they're asking for months and months to prepare, even though they've had like 3 years to prepare ever since he committed these crimes. Trump is not a lightweight. He spent, I think, around like $30 to $40 million on lawyers in the last 4 to 5 years. So it's not like this question has never been brought up unless Trump is actually demented and a knuckle dragger and has no forethought whatsoever. So I don't know why they would want to delay it outside of they want to watch the clock. You know how sometimes I don't know if you guys watch basketball or football or sports people. I assume many of you guys being my fans, you're not super into sports, except for my Ukrainian viewership. They love boxing in Ukraine. But a lot of times in football, you'll see once they're like kind of ahead, they'll take a knee and just run out the clock. That's what I think currently the legal defense is. As not only it is possible that they're unprepared and scrambling, but I think they're trying to run to the clock. Anyway, let's read part of this article. Former President Donald Trump was charged with 4 federal crimes Tuesday afternoon relating to his efforts to stay in office despite losing the 2020 election, an unprecedented move that follows months of investigation into the lead up to the January 6th Capitol riot, marking his 3rd set of criminal charges since leaving office. Trump was charged in D.C. federal court with conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy against the right of citizens, obstructing an official proceeding, and conspiring to obstruct an official proceeding. The 45-page indictment says Trump pursued unlawful means of discontinuing legitimate votes and subverting the election process. Part of what the Department of Justice alleges were 3 conspiracies that targeted a bedrock function of the United States federal government. So let's talk about these 4 separate charges. So the first one is conspiracy to defraud the United States. So this is lying about things like voter fraud, dead people voting, bamboo paper, like nonsense like that, lying about that publicly in order to try to trick the United States, trick government officials into changing the results of the elections, going to state officials to try to do that. A conspiracy to defraud the United States. Now, what's interesting about this charge is they're going to have to prove that Trump knowingly did this, because it's not illegal to lie. Right? Trump could go out there and say every day that actually he won and every single American voted for him. He could do that. But once he uses that and pushes that narrative in a legal fight in multiple courts, they push that to try to get fake electors on board, to try to subvert the actual electors that were voted on in their states. When they try to use this to try to rum up support in order to actually overturn the election, and they pursue that path, that is not allowed. That is illegal. That's the first charge. Conspiracy against the rights of citizens. This has to do with denying people the right to vote and trying to deny them their rights. If you're trying to replace fake electors with the real electors, you're trying to replace the real electors with fake electors, the people who voted for those real electors, their right to vote basically becomes worthless. Because if you can basically say, no, they're the fake, this elector is real elector, screw them, you're going to use this fake elector that says Trump won, then you're discounting those people who voted for the actual elector, right? So this is talking about taking away the rights of citizens to vote. This is actually, I think, tied to the Voting Rights Act. So, my goodness, congratulations, LBJ. You're still capping Republicans to this day. Where are we going? Next one. Obstructing an official proceeding and conspiring to obstruct an official proceeding. This is not exactly the same charge, but they're basically the same charge. This has to do with Donald Trump's attempt to obstruct the passover of power from Donald Trump over to Joe Biden. Now, I don't know how much this is going to go into the actual physical violence on January 6th, because obviously Donald Trump was not in the streets with rioters, like smashing windows and like beating over cops. He didn't take that woman who got, what was the name of that woman? Ashley Babbitt. He didn't use Ashley Babbitt as like a human shield as he was running through the halls of Congress. Give me power. That didn't happen, right? But the argument is made that in his pursuance, and I've heard other legal experts bring this as well, this is outside of the what we have presently in the 45-page indictment, but in his pursuance of trying to overturn the election when it comes to the fake electors and everything else, he also tried to get Mike Pence to go off the beaten path. Go off of his congressionally mandated task of handing over power from one administration to the other and certifying the election process, trying to get him to use his fake electors. That's obstructing the official process. And when that didn't really work, then the other attempt was to just get him to kind of like flip the table overall, send it back to the states, which are majority controlled by Republicans. When you look at the state legislators across the country, they vote, and then Donald Trump gets into office, basically circumventing the process, trying to obstruct that. I don't know how much it's going to get into the actual violence on the day of J6. I don't know how strong that case is, but there's just an example of the obstructing. The indictment takes aim at several parts of Trump's efforts to stay in office. Now, this right here, we're going to take a moment to look back on this to just show how bad this is. And this is also somewhat related to another thing that Trump might be indicted for in his fourth indictment from the state of Georgia. The indictment takes aim at several parts of Trump's effort to stay in office. It takes his criminal conspiracies, including pushing state officials like Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to overturn Joe Biden's wins, leading a scheme to put together bogus slate of electors that declared Trump the winner of several crucial swing states, and using the DOJ to conduct sham election crime investigations. So here is the call that they are actually referring to. I don't know if we're gonna play it completely because, well, we're not gonna play the entire call. The entire call is over an hour, but we are gonna play this clipped version. Now, if you think this is clip chimped, if I'm clip chipping Trump, you can watch the full thing. Also posted by the Washington Post, but I'm not going to sit down and watch the full thing again for like the third or fourth time. So we're just going to watch the clipped version so you can see how obvious it is when Donald Trump is basically trying to strong arm Georgian government officials to find the exact number of votes necessary for him to win the state, which just so happens to be a crucial swing state. Also, when you look at all these investigations that he was doing in all these states and where he's applying pressure, notice that none of them were in states like, I don't know, Texas or Florida. They were all in states which Democrats won, which, because the defense for the Trump team and the defense for a lot of Trump defenders, when I bring this up, I remember when I talked to Christian Watson, a more libertarian right-wing content creator, about this, he said that this is about wanting all the votes to be counted. If that was the case, why did Trump only pressure the states where he lost? If it was about having all the votes be counted, which also just when he names the amount of votes that needs to be counted, he names the exact amount of votes necessary for him to win. So I think that shows clear intent. But if it was about that, despite that piece of evidence, why did he not pressure the states where he won to have recounts, to have investigations? Why not Texas? Huh? Why not Texas? Why not Florida? Why not Ohio? Why just the swing states where he lost? I think that shows pretty clear intent as to what he was trying to do. Anyway, let's listen to the audio.
We have won this election in Georgia based on all of this. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, Brad. You know, I mean, having a correct, the people.
Be clear, he's talking to Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia at the time, which was why he wasn't completely blowing Trump off. He's basically telling Trump, like, we have no evidence of what you're saying. Like, this is just, you know, basically lost, right? We don't have any evidence. And afterwards, because Brad Raffensperger did not go through with Trump's plan, Trump lambasted him so much into the next election. It wasn't enough to actually unseat Brad Raffensperger. He was reelected, but Trump tried hard to get him replaced. They fought hard against him in the primary.
People of Georgia are angry. And these numbers are going to be repeated on Monday night, along with others that we're going to have by that time, which are much more substantial even. And the people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, you know, that you've recalculated.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
Now, do you think it's possible that they shredded ballots in Fulton County? Because that's what the rumor is. And also that Dominion took out machines. That Dominion is...
Imagine gathering fake electors to overthrow the election, right? And the best case you can come up with is, I don't know, I bet all the real votes were torn up. So how about, instead of trying to count any of the real votes, we just do a fake vote where we take the people who aren't actually electors and replace the real electors. It's, again, all of this only makes sense if Donald Trump's sole objective is to stay president, no matter the cost and no matter who actually won and lost. And remember, Donald, like, I'm sorry I keep saying remember, but there's just so much information around this. Donald Trump, going into 2020, said multiple times, if he loses, it is rigged. He was saying clear in 2020 that he was not going to accept if he lost. In 2015, in the Republican primary, multiple times when he lost or he underperformed anywhere, he would accuse some sort of malpractice. He would accuse some sort of foul play, even sometimes against his Republican opponents. In the lead up to 2016, he also kind of put into question whether he'd accept the results or not. But into 2020, he was the most clear about it, that if he loses, it is rigged. If you say that out loud, what you're really acknowledging is that you will not accept if you lose ever. That is what he was saying. And so then he loses, and big surprise, doesn't accept it and takes every trick in the book possible, attempts everything he can to overturn the Democratic election, to overturn the results, the real results of the election with his unironic fake electors. And when I say unironic, I mean that they are literally fake electors. So he talks about all these fraudulent votes all the time, and then when the rubber hits the road, he tries to get fraudulent electors to take the place of real electors, actual election interference, which he is accusing this case of being. And we're going to listen to Trump's response after we're done with this audio segment.
Really moving fast to get rid of their machinery. Do you know anything about that? Because that's illegal.
This is Ryan, Germany. No, Dominion has not moved any machinery out of Fulton County. We're having.
But have they moved? Have they moved the inner parts of the machines and replaced them with other parts?
No.
You sure, Ryan?
I'm sure.
You should want to have an accurate election, and you're a Republican.
We believe that we do have an accurate election.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have, not even close. You're off by hundreds of thousands of votes. You know what they did, and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen.
This is intimidation, by the way, to be clear. To come in, call in, say, you're so off, and by the way, you're a criminal for not trying to fix this problem that doesn't exist but would make me the winner. He's trying to intimidate him. That is what's happening here.
That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk. But they are shredding ballots, in my opinion.
I love that, by the way. They're shredding ballots, in my opinion. That's not an opinion thing. That's a whether it happened or did not happen thing, right? Like, I would not be able to say, like, I think Bill Cosby is dead, in my opinion. No, he either is dead or he's not dead.
Based on what I've heard. And they are removing machinery, and they're moving it as fast as they can, both of which are criminal fines, and you can't let it happen, and you are letting it happen. I'm notifying you that you're letting it happen. So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
He gives him, if you're curious what that number was the exact amount of votes that Donald Trump was down by when he called him. He gave him an exact amount of votes. Exact amount. Doesn't try to hide it in any way. The exact amount of votes necessary for him to win. The exact amount. If his issue was election transparency and having a free and fair election, why is it that he just so happens, when bringing up the amount of votes that were stolen, it just so happens to, or the amount of votes that need to be quote unquote fixed, it just so happens to perfectly correlate what would be necessary for him to win? After he made threats to his career and his freedom, saying it was a criminal offense. You remember, this is not some little local official. This is the president of the United States telling you could face criminal problems for not obeying his orders. That's something that most people, for good reason, would take pretty seriously. Very, very seriously. Anyway, I do just want to mention one more time that this is not the only piece of evidence. There is so much more evidence. You've got RNC officials who would try to be recruited in this fake elector scheme that have essentially flipped and are talking to prosecutors and are talking to investigators. You've got his former chief of staff who has flipped. You've got people who also testified during the January 6th committee that were related to Trump and in Trump's circle that have flipped. You've got audio. You've got paperwork. You've got... The case against him is very solid. Let's see how Donald Trump has responded under the heat.
Make a brief statement before getting on the plane, which he's on now. I just want to play you what he said.
This is after he went to court and he pled not guilty. They didn't even give him a microphone. Apparently, he just looked straight in the judge's face. This is from firsthand witnesses, and just said not guilty with not guilty to each charge, and then left the courthouse. Simple as that. But they had to release him, which meant that he was within the court's custody. So, president within the court's custody, huh? Man.
Well, thank you very much. This is a very sad day for America, and it was also very sad driving through Washington, D.C. and seeing the filth and the decay and all of the broken buildings and walls and the graffiti. This is not the place that I left. It's a very sad...
It's, as a DMV local, DC has really physically, like, in relation to like trash or like homelessness issue, it has not changed really significantly at all between the Trump and Biden administrations when it comes to the status of the city's homelessness or littering or graffiti. I don't know what he's talking about.
Thing to see it. When you look at what's happening, this is a persecution of a political opponent. This was never supposed to happen in America. This is the persecution of the person that's leading by very, very substantial numbers in the Republican primary and leading Biden by a lot. So if you can't beat him, you persecute him or you prosecute him. We can't let this happen in America. Thank you very much.
Do you want these trials to happen?
We should point out that when the former president left office and left Washington, D.C., the city was on lockdown because of the attack on January 6th.
Jesus. Okay. So his response is basically the same thing as usual. I don't think that this response is going to play poorly to the Republican primary voter. I think it's going to play well enough. There's already been some polling data released showing that the indictments actually make Republicans want to support him more. 64% of Republicans support Donald Trump more or will continue to support him no matter what these indictments really say. So it would have to be something else that would boot them off of supporting Donald Trump. So I don't think this is going to affect him in the primary. I do think that this is not going to play well with independent voters, especially as the legal proceedings go on. Now, I think point to the reopening of the case into Hillary Clinton by James Comey in the weeks preceding the 2016 election as maybe something we could compare it to, and the severity of the charges then, and really nothing was presented in that time period that brought forward anything that would show, okay, we need to put Hillary behind bars or you're found guilty. It all fell apart. It all fell through. There was nothing there. There's a lot more here. A lot more here. Not saying there was nothing there around the emails case, just saying that there wasn't enough there to proceed really anywhere else. There's a lot more here with a lot more cases, 3 separate indictments, possibly 4 separate indictments, dozens upon dozens of counts across multiple court cases that he's going to be facing down going into the 2024 election. And one of those cases, this case right here, is about him trying to subvert our democracy as we head into another Democratic election. The more evidence that is presented as we start to hear the testimony from the unindicted co-conspirators, I think they left them unindicted because they want this case to be stronger, and it's going to be harder if people have a motivation not to talk to prosecutors and not to share evidence. But when the unindicted co-conspirators and all the other witnesses from his inner circle start coming forward with testimony, on top of this audio is played in court and they confront him directly, I don't think that's going to help him, man. But outside of the like politics and the electoral back and forth, which I think really should take a backstage to this, what's more important is setting a precedent that no person in the future can attempt to do this to our democracy, can attempt to do this to our electoral system and get away with it. Because if somebody believes they can get away with it, what would stop somebody as greedy or as power hungry as Donald Trump from attempting something like this again, if given the opportunity? And maybe if they have more support amongst the general population, or they're able to get the military possibly involved, maybe fill it with cronies or attempt to win their favor in such an endeavor, maybe they'd have more success. And I think that might have been a major problem that actually hindered Donald Trump, because part of the draft executive orders that were written up during all of this chaos as Donald Trump tried to overturn the results of the election was an executive order that talked about the military seizing voting machines in delaying the transfer of power to give them more wiggle room to overturn the results of the election. But people in positions of power, people within the military, didn't seem to take too kindly to this notion. Not saying everybody did, but it seems that a lot of people, definitely in the higher ups of the military, didn't take so kindly to this. Here's an example. Here is a message from Mark Milley about this period of time. They may try, but they're not going to fucking succeed, Milley said of a possible government takeover in conversation with his closest deputies, according to the book. You can't do this without the military. You can't do this without the CIA and the FBI. We're the guys with the guns, he said. The general, having listened to Trump spread an array of baseless conspiracy theories and false claims of fraud throughout the final weeks of his term, had drawn parallels with the rise of Nazism in 20th century Germany, the book said. This is a Reichstag moment, Milley said, telling his aides in early January. The gospel of the Führer. On January 6, a mob of Trump supporters, many of whom had gathered for the president's fiery speech outside of the White House, invaded the Capitol, vandalizing the halls of government and forcing a joint session of Congress into hiding. After the deadly invasion, Milley stressed that, come hell or high water, there will be a peaceful transfer of power on January 20th, one senior official said in the book. We've got an aircraft, our landing gear is stuck, we've got one engine, and we're out of fuel. We've got to land this bad boy. Milley, leading a January 14th military drill in advance of Biden's inauguration, reportedly said, here's the deal, guys. These guys are Nazis. They're Boogaloo boys. They're Proud Boys. These are the same people we fought in World War II. Everyone in this room, whether you're a cop, whether you're a soldier, we're going to stop these guys to make sure we have a peaceful transfer of power. We're going to put a ring of steel around this city, and the Nazis aren't getting in, Milley said, according to the book. Well, excuse me to cuss Miss Sherman. Well, excuse me, Mr. Grant. Excuse me, Mr. Ulysses S. Grant. Oh my God. Oh my God. I didn't know he was so fiery in private. Everybody knows that Mark Milley doesn't like Donald Trump. It doesn't take an expert to know that Mark Milley doesn't like Donald Trump. And Donald Trump doesn't like Mark Milley. And much of the Republican base doesn't like Mark Milley. But I think you can start to see a reason why Donald Trump doesn't like Mark Milley. Because Mark Milley seems to be a gigantic road bump in his way to centralize power around him, in his attempt to centralize power around himself and overturn the Democratic election of 2020, the result of that election. My goodness. Hey, all I have to say is thank God it wasn't the other way around. It was some sort of Trump loyalist. Oof.